work style profiles, as well as noticed some observations of some stuff emerging naturally in Quip. Joseph Chow was one in particular I saw recently, where their working preferences and style and asks around communication were emerging, and we're starting to push that into the TM&T design activities that we have on the go related to personal profiles. For Lisa and Kate, I don't know if you've been exposed through Susan as to the TM&T project that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I talked to one of the team last week. I can't remember his name. It sounds awesome, and I want to know more and get access, please.
I love that, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing. I came across Joseph's How to Work with Joseph Chow document this morning, and it is awesome. And I actually just wrote to him to say, like, what a good idea. I think I'm going to do one for myself, and maybe encourage it from my team. Yeah, I'm just
Cool.
still feeling a little nervous to kind of intro it to my team, but
yeah, that can take time, Tanya. But
yeah.
slowly, little by little, starting with some nice light touch micro practices.
Yeah.
And then the people are like, what's this? What's happening here? Hey, can someone do me a favor and Slack Camilla? And also, Josh is coming late, and also Saraswati, just to say, hey, we're waiting for you.
Saraswati's actually out sick today. Apologize. We probably should have shared that. She messaged our working team. Okay. So we'll share notes with her, and she'll join us later in the week.
Okay, great. Cool, thanks. Yeah. If that does happen, yeah, we just publish it somewhere, or
we'll do for sure. Yeah.
Great.
Guys, I have a bit on my mind. I just feel a bit conscious about not showing up to the last meeting. And it was a Saturday morning for me, but I would have shown up. I just didn't look at my calendar that night, and I was free. That was all that happened. But and now I know. And I watched the recording yesterday, and I got a lot out.
Cool. Okay, so thanks for that, Thomas. We're going to start now. Oh, is my connection okay? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. Well, thanks all for being here, and we'll have a few people jumping in as we go, I think. We're going to start with a check-in, of course. And the check-in question for this week is to think for a minute about what drives you and gives you joy in your work. And so maybe you can just take a breath with me. I was at a retreat on the weekend with this Buddhist master. He was in his 50s, and most of us were in our 30s, running around, getting all crazy. And quite a lot, he would just say, take a breath with me. And it really helped us kind of, be present and be calm. So take a breath with me and think about the question, what drives you and gives you joy in your work? And I'll write that into the chat. Okay, we'll do a nominate style check-in, which can be a bit, you can experience the difference from popcorn style. And I'm going to nominate Malky. Please, I'd love to hear from you.
It's a really good question. I'll be very honest and say that lately I've been struggling with this on a very personal level. So I'm a person who I very intentionally have built my career slowly but steadily with things that drive me and give me joy, and that I'm connect to. And so this is a new place for me to be in, where I'm not sure if it's a little bit burnt out or just what it is, which is why I'm appreciating this group as well, the things that we're learning. So at the moment, I'm figuring that out. But in general, I think we're working with like-minded, thoughtful folks who are equally as invested in the work that we're doing is definitely what makes a great place or environment to work for me. And what drives me is just mindful work. I don't know. We'll go with that for now.
Great. Thanks, Malky. Can you nominate the next person and we'll continue in this flow?
Sure. I will nominate Thomas because he's probably the person I know least. So, hi. Nice to meet you.
Well, what drives me is that other people are driven by a purpose. And one of the big things I've really realized is that teams really need to have a purpose. Otherwise, they're just kind of like floating in the wind, and they keep changing their mind. And it's generally the only drive after that is a sort of a hidden for-profit drive. So I really get union, or really feel complete. It's more, I get really excited when humans get excited about something else other than money. That's really what drives me. And so that generally is labeled as a purpose. And I don't see it enough. That's what drives me. And it's mainly people making a choice in their life that they're inspired by something. The inspiration, and that's what gives me my energy every day. I'm just running on it. It's just beautiful.
Who are you nominating? Thanks, Thomas.
Brian.
For me, it's what I've come to understand, or my personal definition of the word love. For me, it's the micro connections that I get to have with other people if they're not there in a given day. I really feel unfulfilled in the work I'm doing. I noticed it at a point in my career where I started to work in a highly technical role that had me quite fulfilled in terms of mastery of what I was doing technically, but I was not getting connections, and I was starting to crave it and establish them in everything I did. The grocery store, I was flying all over the place as a consultant, so my friends that I made in line with my ticket in the airport, it just became clear that I was looking forward to that moment more than what I was doing at work.
Thanks, Brian. Beautiful. Who are you nominating?
I will nominate Mary.
Well, thank you for the nomination, because I feel the same way. For me, I think it's a funny question because I don't really think about it in terms of like what motivates me around work. It's like all of me. And I guess that's part of it, is like that love connection. And feeling like I can really be myself, like it's safe for me to be myself, and the other people that I'm with are really truly their whole selves when they're working, and being really honest and intimate. And so feeling appreciated and grateful comes into play there as well for me. I feel like that at home as well, not just at work. That's when I have the most joy. So, nominate Tanya.
Thank you. This is a really hard question for me to answer. I'll just be honest. I'm just someone who just gets on with things and executes. Like, that's just how I've always operated. So asking me these kinds of questions especially around work, is really challenging for me. I think what I can say right now from my sort of time here at Consensus, and when I felt very, very absorbed into my work, it tends to be when I'm facilitating conversations, when I'm facilitating discussions, when I'm facilitating introductions between people, kind of like finding shared language, shared mission, shared goals, and then like turning it into an idea and then executing the idea and trying to keep like all the pieces of the puzzle sort of together and all the people together. And I suppose like the drive of that, of creating like a group and creating an idea and a task and a project is really so that I can feel like I'm contributing something And that's kind of the driving point of like, let me contribute something of value. So yeah, I nominate Daniel.
Thanks, Tanya. Everyone. So I think there are a few things that drive me, and that might actually be different than the things that give me joy. So I know that what really motivates me is really hard problems, such as problems that make your brain hurt, or you say, hey, I'm not even sure that's solvable. And then by working with really smart people with lots of different expertise, you're able to sort of come together and start hacking away at that. I find that incredible. And the other bit is sort of outcomes, seeing sort of them very action oriented, sometimes to a fault. And I think for me, I don't know if this is true for other people or an exception, but success drives passion more than the other way around. I get really excited when I see things start to move, and that sort of becomes a repeated process. And then I think the thing that gives me most joy, though, is brainstorming and sort of ideating and just sort of dreaming up all the possibilities. But I know if I do that, I can easily get lost in that, and that's not the best way to sort of drive the outcomes or move the needles forward. So Edson, I'd like to nominate you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a very good question. I also had some kind of, I was facing a very difficult stage like 2 months ago, because mostly because I'm working in the solution side, and this is very enterprise. And there was a moment in my journey here with Consensus that I felt that, okay, what I'm doing is just a commodity trading platform that I'm building, but I cannot see anything, and I wanted to make impact. Like and I started to be confused about myself, and I was like, okay, what I'm doing, and then I remember that I started to think what really drives me, and I realized that it doesn't matter where I am, but it's about how I respond to those external factors. And then I say, okay, I'm gonna do my best, and I just gonna try to share with everyone, because I feel very happy when I'm sharing with people, teaching people, and they say, hey, thank you for this, thank you for that. I don't know, but I feel really happy with doing those kind of things. So I think, yeah, so right now I'm just trying to do my best, and yeah. And I nominate Travis.
Yeah, I would say I think mine. Well, there's quite a few that were covered that I really like there, but I'd say it's as simple for me as incremental progress every day. I get a lot of joy out of, regardless of what mission I'm working on. It's really marking things done. Might be the project manager inside of me that enjoys that. And then I would say, so I think years ago I thought a lot more about like my purpose and like what am I supposed to do in my life, and I still think about those things. Could be because I have 2 kids now that I feel like I've become more efficient in my day-to-day job. So I've tried to drill down to like, in order to make that greater progress in the purpose of like what I'm supposed to contribute to life and to the teams I work with, I just think about like day-to-day, week-to-week progress. And then generally finding ways to help others around me. I'd still say I get the best dopamine shot is just like, if I find out someone needs help with something, I love to be able to surprise them and say like, hey, I worked on XYZ for you, and this might be able to help you. Or, by the way, I had some ideas and I was like drawing them up for you. So yeah. And then I would like to nominate, oh geez, actually, who are we left with? We've almost covered.
Lisa and me.
Cool. How about you, Kate? You go first.
Cool, yeah, there's so much goodness coming through here. Lovely to hear. I think, yeah, I resonate with a lot of this. But surprisingly, I don't know if it's a surprise, I also am really driven by like the excitement of seeing new things like emerge into the world. Our friend Alana from Inspiral has written this beautiful article called Full Circle Leadership. we'll put it in the chat, and there's like the spectrum of like the people in a team, or like the styles of leadership, and at the very beginning of this circle was like the visioning and like the dreaming, and then you get all the way around to the other at the end, which is like the soldier and the people that kind of make things optimizers. And I just like sit in that first arc of like visioning and like dreaming and like starting. So that really makes me very happy. But it needs to be, reflecting a bit of what Edson said, really aligned with my theory of change. Like if I don't feel aligned with like what I've worked out is in my core as like the way that I can make an impact on the world because of like the huge problem that we're in, I need to be like fully clear that I'm like, yeah, doing my best to achieve that impact. Otherwise I get all like stressed out and I actually stop producing. So I'm probably quite a hard person to work with, really, because I need to be having a lot of fun. I need to be like fully in line with my theory of change, and I need to be able to produce and do new crazy things all the time. So Lisa and Fran and all the rest of my team, thank you. I'll pass to you, Lisa.
Well, I think for me, like what drives me in work this afternoon was a perfect example, like just a like absolute crystallization, because I was sitting in the garden in the sunshine in Amsterdam with 3 nurses from Buurtzorg, which is like a 15,000 person self-managed healthcare company. And they were sharing these stories of how their team is like a family, and how it's really challenging because they have to be so honest with each other and give each other feedback all the time, and have challenging conversations, but that they love it and they're so passionate about their work, and that this self-management stuff, it really works. And to them it's like so normal. And I was saying to them, like, this is my dream, sitting here talking to you guys, and they were like, well, this is like normal for us. So for me, it's like I get so excited when I experience moments like that, because I think if I can capture in any small way a piece of that possibility and share it with the world in a podcast, in a blog, in a conversation with someone that might inspire or encourage them to work in a more purposeful, fulfilling, effective way, then that to me is like, that's the dream. So I felt very lucky and kind of on cloud 9 this afternoon. It was great.
Cool. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone. That was some beautiful, rich sharing. And yeah, we've got down to a level really quickly, which I love to see in these types of calls. And that's, even though I think it's testament to the fact that even though we're distributed around the globe, we can kind of know each other in some way. So now we've got a nice, spacious call tonight. We've got Doug Kirkpatrick joining us at the top of the hour from Morningstar, who is an incredibly interesting guy, and Lisa's going to be interviewing him, and we're going to make space for you to ask questions, and we really encourage you to do that. And I mean, this is like, anything goes, and even if it's not polished, it's totally appreciated by him and all of our guest speakers. But before then, we are going to just do some reflecting on the first week in groups of 2. So another crucial part of facilitating online calls and in-person meetings is giving people the opportunity to go into very small groups, 2s or 4s, and you get just a whole new layer of richness, and you also help create stronger relationships with people, which is very important. So we're going to go into 2s and discuss our reflection and takeaways from both the personal group assignments and the individual assignments and the group assignments. What was surprising? What did you notice? What came out for you? How are you, as Tanya and Ryan kicked us off in this conversation earlier, how are you applying some of this stuff already? And we've got about 5 minutes each in these small groups, so a lot of time. Actually, let's do 8, and then if we might do some sharing back, Lisa. So maybe we're going to do random assignments in breakout rooms, and maybe you'll get someone you haven't met, but who knows? Unless you want to try to do it manually, Lisa. No. Let's go automatic.
Okay, let's go automatic. Let's try it.
So just in twos, what came up from it'd be really cool to have a few minutes to share back about those individual ones as well. And I know you probably did a little bit of this on Friday. I haven't watched yet, but go deep if possible. You all good, Lisa?
Yeah, I'll create breakout rooms. Just hoping that you and I won't end up in one, but if we do, we'll just leave them. Okay.
I'm keen to chat.
Shit. Let's see. I can't. You end up in a room. Well, you can just leave it, Kate.
Okay, no problem.
Cool.
I just rejected the invitation.
Yeah, it's totally being with like just understanding where they want to get to, and that's the space that I get excited by. But we can have another conversation, like, and you can drill me on that one.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm definitely up against some people who feel very threatened. Let's put it that way.
Ooh, what's happening?
It's all about how you're being, and yeah, and then the whole group elevates to a whole new beautiful level. It's like a new flower flourishing.
Yeah, I actually find myself using certain tactics, like just kind of bowing out altogether because I just don't want any conflict. But that's a really good point, and kind of trying to figure out what's their end goal, and like questioning them, like, what do you want? Like, I don't know.
Wow, that sounds like a rich conversation. Sorry for truncating it. And perhaps we can do some wise crowds on Zoom at some point, which is a great liberating structure where you get some consulting from your colleagues and friends and I think we can do it on Zoom, Lisa. We can probably do that now.
Yeah, definitely. Wise crowds is great. I love wise crowds.
Lisa and I and Susan are all very, very big fans of basically all liberating structures, which Wise Crowds is one of. Hi, Samantha. Glad you could join us. I'm going to ask you to do the check-in, which is the question, what drives you and I can't even remember what it is. Did someone help me out?
And brings you joy.
And brings you joy. Yes, in your work. And I'll give you 20 seconds to think about it. And we are going to now just do some reflecting back about what we learned in those little twosomes after Samantha's checked in, and then we're going to start talking about social contracts and agreements. So Samantha, go ahead.
Hey guys, sorry for being a little late. People drive me, and cooperation and passionate people give me joy in my work.
Cool. Very nice and snappy. Okay, so from our groups of two, just love some quick reflections and noticings about what you learnt or what came up for you in last week's work. Does anyone want to pop first? We don't have to hear from everyone, just if you feel the burning need to share, go ahead and just put your hand up and I'll call you in. I love this. Thomas, I see you unmuting. Go ahead.
I was just like, oh yeah, like popcorn's taking a while to cook sometimes, but that's fine. Well, yeah, everyone's in their different space, and it's just about helping people get to wherever they want to get to. That was what came out of my mouth before in the sharing. And I feel like we didn't get enough time to sort of bounce backwards and forwards. So I think we're going to have like more of a one-on-one. Well, I offered with Tanya to have a one-on-one and get our conversation complete, even after the meeting, if you want, Tanya.
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. And welcome, Camilla. We're just doing some reflecting on last week's assignments, and then I'll ask you to check in, and we've got Josh as well. I'll ask you to both check in with this question, and then we're going to start talking about social contracts, but love to hear from a couple more people about what was coming up for them. or from their partner about the work of last week.
I can share. Happy to share a little bit. So Edson and I were chatting, and Edson brought up what I think is probably what's on many of our minds is a lot of what Tanya was bringing up earlier, like how to bring this back into the teams that we're on. And yeah, we were just kind of going back and forth on, aside from the fact that, you know, when you have multiple humans together, things get complex quickly, but specific personalities as well, right? And we were focusing also that he's on a team that has a piece that I think is
Okay.
so there's the revenue generating piece, right? So it's an external facing team. They have clients, and so other priorities where something like this, the self-organizing and this putting this less corporate focus, we'll just use that as like a very generic, we know it's a lot more than that, that it may even be like another layer that would be difficult to implement. And so we didn't have any answers, but it was just like a very real concern and like, you know, just talking through, which was interesting.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. But let's don't hesitate to bring in the complexity and the complications, because I am so overjoyed to hear like the level of drive that people in this group have for connecting with humans and relationships and people. And of course, the other side of it is that there's so much complexity involved when any constellation of humans get together, and in real life things just get complicated, and we act in ways that we can't foresee, and so do others. And so we just need to keep bringing the honesty about how hard this all is, and supporting each other where possible, and thinking about some of those external forces, like, you know, when there is money or a commercial reality bearing down on you, and the pressure that creates in people's lives. And yeah, hey little Travis, do you want to say a quick hi?
Yeah, this is Jude. He's 2, so he just my wife Eliza walked away for a sec, so he was not very happy with me.
Okay.
He's feeling the pressure of life is all, and hearing all the deep thoughts here. He's just trying to contemplate all of that, right?
Hey Jude. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks, Malky. And we'll just skip. We'll go straight to Camilla now to check in, and then Josh, and then we better kick into social contracts. Oh, and we've got some commentary from Thomas, but we'll go back to this later, Thomas. Camilla, welcome.
Hey guys, I'm at a conference, so it's a little bit loud here. So the question is, what drives you and motivates you? Hold on, let me just quickly go back to the chat. What drives you and gives you joy in your work? Actually, like right now, this is a perfect example here. I'm at the Oslo Freedom Forum conference, and right now we heard from political activists from pretty much from all over the world, from many parts of the world where people do not have the freedom to speak out. They live in oppressed regimes where they don't have any tools to be free, to be who they are and what they think. There aren't that many resources. So, and right now, we're taking a break right now. It's a lot to process, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed by all the stories that I've heard. But the great news is that here at Oslo Freedom Forum, it's one of the events that we are sponsoring here. They get a platform to speak to all of the leaders in the Western world to help them make a change, to spread the word. And this is what I care about. I care about supporting people and giving voice to those who don't have one. And consensus, in addition to sponsoring, Consensus is also building technologies where people can gain control back in their lives. Sorry if this is like intense or too much to take. So, but this is something that motivates me and drives me.
Woohoo! Don't be sorry. Welcome, Camilla. Hey, Josh.
Hey, thanks, Camila. So what drives me and gives me joy in my work? I have to say learning and growth. Being on Academy, I've learned a ton about Ethereum, but also being in a small team and working well with people remotely. And we're also trying to push that out into the world, not push it, but make it available for people. So other people can learn and deepen their understanding of Ethereum and blockchain technology and the values behind that. And growth. I mean, learning fosters growth, and it's cool to see and like realize growth. It's just, and that's kind of like why we're all here in this group as well, to learn about ourselves and each other and what we can do for the mesh, and then grow ourselves and help the mesh grow. So
Great. Thank you. So now we've got Doug coming on in 14 minutes. So we will start talking a bit more in depth about agreements and social contracts. And Lisa and I we were talking before, and it's kind of the torch I bear a lot around self-management, is too much codification is not always good, although it is helpful. So with that, I do want to show you a bit, dive back into how I think of the approach to self-management at the ecosystem level. So in a very large organization like Consensus, or even a pretty small one like Inspiral, you do need some ecosystem codification, just so that there's some hard stops where, like, even if there's no rules that are enforceable, the group has some kind of way to like moderate behavior. So I think at Inspiral we've done a really good job at this ecosystem codification, which I'll show you now. We have all of our agreements from that we've made over the last kind of 7 years at Inspiral, codified into our handbook, which is an open source resource, which I know that one of the groups, Daniel's team, were looking at Inspiral this week. Should stop moving that around. So you may want to comment on this a little bit, but basically on the left-hand side there, we've got all of our decisions. These agreements have been made on Lumio, which are quorum decisions, the majority of them. So to become codified, the things that we agree are our kind of ecosystem level agreements, thereby everyone that's part of Inspiral has to agree to these. That happens in Lumio, and then they're put in here. So we have all the list of them down on the left-hand side, and you're welcome to go and have a look. They're totally, and even fork it if it's helpful. But yeah, and there's a bit of a richness in here, and related policies and guidelines. So it's kind of like quite a good indication, I think, of how to do some codification where really necessary. So these are like pretty high level board agreement, harassment and abuse, personal conduct. So we're spending a lot of time trying to bring in our values in these agreements around diversity, looking at privilege, even entrepreneurship. So we're covering both people and venture in this codification, which is really interesting because our approach to agreements is MVP as possible, so minimum viable for everything, but always have what is necessary to mean that the safety of individuals in a group isn't in danger. So that's the ecosystem approach, and we want to talk a bit about team level social contracts, which is kind of the focus of this week's assignment, but also at the other level, which is the I in social management and self-management, which was the kind of the theme of the week last week. But yeah, I think a good, at the team level, there's also such a thing as implicit agreements. So not everything does need to be codified. And if you do have everything written down and agreed to, it becomes a little bit heavy in my mind. So the work of having nice, strong boundaries and implicit agreements is also a big part of this work. I have seen a lot of teams that come into self-management practice try to push everything into codified agreements. And I just want to, while it's really important, I just really want to also show the other side that implicit agreements between people are really important too. And a lot of that is based on communication, speaking from a needs-based approach. For instance, my co-founder at my company, Francesca, just turned to me one day and said, I really need, for when I share an idea, that your reaction is just, that's great, well done, awesome, I can't wait to explore further, rather than coming in with the, the constructive criticism analysis brain, which sometimes is what my tendency is. So I was like, oh, of course, I mean, it's easy for me to do. And we just kind of operate off that principle, that I know that she gets really crushed and she gets really deflated if I say, oh yeah, what about this aspect of this idea? And it's really not good for our relationship. So we just have an implicit agreement that my reaction is just great. So that's a little one I wanted to share. And Lisa, I wanted to ask you about some of your thoughts on specifically implicit agreements and how you've seen them in the context of some of the companies you work with.
Yeah, I totally echo what you're saying. And I think the tendency can be to overcomplicate things or to write down lots of things. And actually it was Francesca that shared with me as well that at WeShare, they made a mistake in the beginning where they were creating a lot of written agreements that were sort of aspirational. These are things that we want to do or be. And so many of them just got left behind, and those documents became dead and no one was using them, but so much time and effort had gone into creating them, so the people who created them, it was frustrating for them. And then they realized actually a sort of MVP approach was much more like only codifying the things or writing down the things that were like the essential, almost like deal breakers, if you like, or the real like key ones. These are the ones that really, are essential or set people up for success, or, if these are broken, then it's going to cause real harm. And I think for me, like at a team and individual level, agreements, something that I'm learning is, again, coming back to this piece about like taking personal responsibility for personal needs, like saying to the team, like, hey guys, I noticed that we have a tendency to always show up to meetings about 5 minutes late. Would it be okay if we had an agreement that we, try and be on time? Or like, that's a really sort of simple, obvious one, but until someone names that, then, it's unlikely that anything's going to happen. Or it might be like a personal thing, like, when I write a message to you in Slack or something, and I want to share something that I see as a concern, or something that I'm really excited about, an idea or something, I know that you are really busy and you don't always have time to digest it, but would it be okay if you just acknowledged it, even in some small way, just a thumbs up or something like that? Like that would be really meaningful for me. And it's like asking for those things, which sometimes feels a bit weird and scary, but then it's like taking responsibility for my need. And then the person can still say no, and then you can agree, create something else. But it's like, it takes care of something to do that. Then that's not taking up any energy anymore, and it kind of builds stronger relationships. So these agreements are such a key part. And Doug, when he comes on shortly, will talk about the value of simplicity as well. And that Morningstar, that's such a great example of really simple and as few principles and agreements as possible to get the maximum effect. So we'll hear about that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, perhaps I need to agree to that principle around responding in Slack. But I wanted to just answer Mary's question about, am I able to be authentic, Kate, in that moment? Great question. And I think that there's actually there's a deeper thing going on with my co-founder, and it's actually the reason that I was always jumping on her ideas, not necessarily with the most positive mind, was that we were having a bit of an ego battle for a while. And we're both now doing the work to like get away from that. So we're like both, you know, young women in our 30s, really strong-minded, like full of like, I don't know, excitement about what we're doing. And we just were like bumping into each other all the time. And in the last few months, Lisa's kind of hopefully being witness to this and has been helping us to really start to hear each other. And I think me really hearing her need and understanding what's behind that, when I don't want to speak about what I think, like what we've agreed that is, but it's actually so many more layers than just me agreeing to what she says. And that's just one small aspect of our relationship, but this is what it takes to build these, you know, I'm going to be in business with her for a long time. It's totally worth it for me to like, for us both to get to this level of like full respect and like working on the ego battle, both ourselves and together. And like, this is at the heart of all of this stuff. And yeah, the second half to my check-in is this is what I definitely show up for. So great question.
I think it's just to build on that. I think it's such a valuable question, and I see someone else, Brian, I think said, how much do you adjust to someone's style, or do you know? And I think whatever you choose, even if the person says, well, no, I can't really do that, or it would be inauthentic for me to do that, at least it's like up on the table now, and that even just naming it makes such a difference. You know, then it's like out in the shared consciousness, and you know, maybe it just makes you a little bit more aware to that person or whatever, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, there's some rich comments coming through. Do you want to, Tanya and Brian, talk to this a little bit?
I mean, I guess, you know, my 2 cents was, yeah, I struggle with this, but I like Lisa's take on naming it. I've found with my co-founders that the more time we've spent kind of like naming our natural styles, or even giving them fun names, like I run up the trunk. That's our internal language between myself and Vic. And he's like, hey, Brian, I think you're running up the trunk again. And he almost has a smile on his face because it's become, you know, a thing. And so there's like, you know, fun naming, the sense of naming it. I don't want to change the fact that I run up the trunk. We've made agreements between myself and Vic that I won't. It's the shadow side of something, you know, that is a strength that we've come to enjoy, and that this is how it's going to play out. And yeah, I sometimes we have a fun one for his patience isn't his style. For me, it's self-regulation is not my style. It never will be. I try to work on it in different ways, but in many contexts, I'm just going to blurt out things. So, or try to move through things really quickly. This run up the trunk thing is just like I'm traversing a problem really, really quickly, and then I even go down multiple paths simultaneously and very verbose, and I'm not giving space for others to catch up. So that's why he will mention that one, and that's when I acknowledge the self-regulation one. You know, we just, Brian just did it again. He put his foot in his mouth. So we've come to accept some and then name others. That's kind of how I try to navigate it. But I often, if I can understand what's motivating somebody else, I generally don't ask them to change it. I like the challenge of trying to figure out how to sit with it. As Tanya says, that can be hard and fun.
Yeah, I am from what Brian was saying around the surrendering point, I think what I've noticed is my habit is probably not as fruitful. Like I think Brian and Vic, like the fact that they've created code words, they've used humor, like they've really sat down and named it, is so incredibly important. I think what I actually do is use it as a way of just checking out. So for me, if someone triggers me, I'll know that it's probably it's probably more to do with them than it is to do with me. But I'll kind of sit with it for a few days, and it'll take me a little while to come back from it, because I'll internalize whatever it is coming up for them. And it takes me a little while to figure out, like, is it my stuff? Is it their stuff? and then most of the time I won't really sort of think to sort of turn around to them and say, hey, this is my need. Like, I think that it takes a lot of courage to turn around to someone and say, hey, would you mind looking at your Zoom camera when you're talking to me, or like when you're listening, or hey, I would actually really appreciate it if you stop typing when I'm trying to speak. Like, these little things for me, I find really hard to ask for that, because I just think almost in a way that I don't have a right to, because this is just their way of being. So it's kind of tricky, and I don't know what the answer is. Maybe over time it will change, and you know, I suppose the risk is that if you allow it to continue, then, like for me, I either check out of it or I'll end up just being, I wonder if I'll get to a point where I'll just snap and then be really angry. I don't know what the balance is.
Yeah. I think it's so much about it takes more energy. I think the longer you don't, something that starts as like a small grain of sand can just get bigger and bigger, and then it costs something for you to not address it. And you know, so these are the nuances of working together. So I want to welcome Doug Kirkpatrick, who's joined us now. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Lisa. Hello, everybody.
So thank you so much for joining us. Doug is like the godfather of agreements and commitment making in organizations. And we've lost Kate for some reason, so I'm going to soldier on, and hopefully she'll join us back again soon. So I'm going to ask Doug some questions and sort of kick off the conversation, and then I really encourage you guys to ask him some questions yourself, because he's got lots of experience and insights in this area. So Doug, why don't you start by, for those who don't know you, saying a little bit about who you are and the work that you've been doing in regards to sort of self-management and self-organization.
Great. Yeah, so I worked in Northern California, where I live, in the 1980s with an entrepreneur named Chris Rufer. And we started a very successful food processing company here that had excellent returns, and it was very high tech and high volume, and it was very successful, but we always felt like something was missing. And we had not put much thought, if any, into organizational design at that earlier company, because we, you know, it just defaulted to the traditional command and control system. And so Chris went off on his own to start another company in the early 1990s. And I joined him at that startup, and we had an opportunity to start with a clean sheet of paper, greenfield, and design an organization that we felt would deliver tremendous returns, but also provide the greatest ecosystem for human beings possible. And so that company is called Morningstar. And in 1990, in the spring, we were working out of a tiny farmhouse in Northern California, building a state-of-the-art factory nearby. The factory would cost $28 million in 1990 dollars. It would be double that today. And we barely started foundation work and construction. And one day our founder came in to the farmhouse and said, I'd like to call a meeting of the colleagues. At that time, there were 24 of us. And I was the only finance administrative type. Everyone else was a technician or an electrician or a mechanic. And so I'd like to talk about how to organize the enterprise. And okay, that's great. So we got together with him in a construction trailer out on the job site. He passed around a document called the Morningstar Colleague Principles. And basically they boil down to two things. The first principle was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And this principle is foundation of all law everywhere in the world, whether you're in Russia, China, New Zealand, the UK, the US, South America, it doesn't matter where you are. people shouldn't use force against other people. And the second principle is that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. And if you imagine a world where everyone aligned their behavior with these two core principles, it would be quite an amazing place, would it not? We wouldn't need armies or navies or locks on our doors or police. But we know that's not reality. But that's not really the point. The point is, the closer we align with these two core fundamental principles, which we think are the most fundamental principles of human interaction, we do better as human beings. We have more integrity, we have more happiness, we have more joy, we get better results, we lead better lives. And so we talked about these principles for a couple hours in our trailer, and finally at the end of the evening we just looked at each other and said, well, we can't think of any reason not to adopt these principles, and so we did. And they became virtually the entire governance of the enterprise. So we went out to finish building the factory. It took another 3 months. And we had thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state. We had equipment arriving from Italy on ocean cargo freighters. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory. And we had to build the factory. We had contractors working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 months. And finally, July 16th of 1990, we threw the switch. We made about 44 million kilograms of industrial tomato concentrate. We changed the cost structure of an entire industry virtually overnight, and we did it without a single human boss. The only boss was the mission of the enterprise, and the governance was the two core principles, which again we think are the most important principles of human interaction. And then the company went on to grow. So we built another factory, expanded our operations up and down the supply chain, and we have embraced these principles. We've kept them alive. They are still the governance of the enterprise. They have never changed. We're now the largest tomato processor in the world. Everyone in North America has eaten our product. It goes into myriad products in the grocery store, millions more around the world because we export globally. We've never had a single human boss. All we do is rely on the two core principles we adopted in that construction trailer that night in 1990. So this apparently is interesting to some people. I tell the story around the world. I consult. I write books and articles and blog posts. I talk with great people like Lisa Gill, and yeah, that's what I do. So that's the story.
Thanks, Doug. I always get sort of goosebumps when you talk about it because it's so beautifully simple and yet so effective, and what you've accomplished is incredible. Tell us about the colleague letter of understanding. What is that, and how is it helpful?
Right. So the colleague letter of understanding is a contract between peers, each of whom has an equal voice with respect to matters that affect them. We operated for 6 years, literally with the entire governance of the enterprise being the two core principles. And in 1995, we built another factory. That factory at that time was the largest single factory, tomato factory in the world. And we recognized that because these factories were a 3-hour drive from each other, we needed some coordination mechanisms just to enable our teamwork and communication, collaboration, and understanding. So we developed an instrument called a colleague letter of understanding. It's a very simple document. It essentially outlines one's personal commercial mission. So we have an overarching enterprise mission, which is to produce tomato products that meet the customer and service expectations of customers in a cost-effective, environmentally responsible manner. That's the overall enterprise mission. But then we ask each colleague, and we refer to each other as colleagues, not employees, because everyone's considered a professional. We ask each colleague to identify a personal commercial mission. So that is the why. Why are you here? Why do you come to work here every day? What does excellence look like in your particular role in this enterprise? And how does what you do support the overall mission, vision, values, and principles of the enterprise? So we ask each colleague to identify personal commercial mission that resonates with them and with their fellow colleagues. We ask them to identify the processes for which they agree to be stewards, to be fully accountable. And we ask them to identify the scope and quantum of decision-making authority with respect to each one of those processes. So it's all about transparency, clarity, and accountability. When you don't have bosses or managers or supervisors or VPs or anything else walking around telling you how you're doing, you have to be able to tell yourself. So we have replaced traditional hierarchy with a network of interlocking peer agreements, and that becomes the infrastructure of collaboration in the enterprise. So decision rights, we also ask people to identify the measures. How do you measure the health of each one of these processes for which you've agreed to be accountable? How do you know if you're executing this process at a high level? If you don't have a boss, you have to be able to tell yourself. So you have to have some measures in place that make sense, that you can communicate to yourself and to the people with whom you work. So those are the basic elements. We have some other language about being fiduciaries of confidential information, being responsible, doing the right thing, integrity, telling the truth, all those things. But the basic elements are the personal commercial mission, the process accountabilities, decision rights, and KPIs. We call the KPIs, by the way, stepping stones, because we consider them stepping stones toward perfection. We don't benchmark against other companies, other industries, or other sectors. We benchmark perfection. So perfection for a cost metric is 0. Perfection for an efficiency metric is 100%. And then we try to express these stepping stones in time series line graphs with trend lines, so we can basically see if we're bending toward perfection or away from perfection. And these are published transparently across the enterprise, and the idea is to trigger conversations. So we want people to be asking about, if the trend's bending up, how can I help you, my fellow colleague, bend that trend line even steeper? If it's bending down, what can I do, my fellow colleague, to help turn that trend around? So it's about this continuous execution, continuous improvement, continuous conversation, and teamwork. It's a very dynamic system. So people negotiate these roles and responsibilities. They're free to renegotiate their roles and responsibilities at any time. It's called self-management. That's what self-management is. People manage themselves. So I'll tap the brakes there and go on.
Yeah, it's that transparency, clarity, and accountability thing is the magic, I think, because I think so many organizations that start experimenting with self-management really struggle with this accountability piece and what that looks like without going back to a kind of top-down command and control way of being. So it's like we're not that familiar with alternatives. And so this is a great example of how you can do that without reinstalling some of those elements of traditional hierarchies that we don't want anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
What else would you say, what advice could you share with us in terms of what are some of the things you've learned about commitment making and some of these agreements that really make the difference between doing it well and doing it in a sort of sloppy way?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lisa. Commitment making and commitment keeping is really the heart of the system. It would not function but for people making and keeping commitments at a high level of excellence. And so our theory of commitment making and commitment keeping is very simple. It has good human value. It also has economic value. So if I can rely 100% on an individual or a company or a store or any entity whatsoever, then the cost of doing business with that person or entity is lower than it would otherwise be if I couldn't rely 100% on that person. So we think that integrity, keeping commitments, and integrity is by definition the concept of keeping commitments. It has tremendous financial and economic value as well as human value. So we pursue that relentlessly. And there are different kinds of commitments. So in the colleague letter of understanding, we kind of identify sort of recurring, continuous, ongoing commitments that people have on a regular basis. And so those are memorialized in the colleague letter of understanding. And those are very important. And those remain in place until they're renegotiated or changed by the parties. But then there is another class of commitments that is also very important. And those are, business critical commitments that come up on the spur of the moment. They may not be recurring, they may not be continuous or ongoing, but they're still very, very important. And so if I need a colleague to provide information for a vital report so I can send information to the bank to get a loan, I need that by a certain day at a certain time, that's a crucial commitment. And I've got to be able to rely on my colleague to deliver on that commitment if he or she agrees to do it. So commitments are very crucial, and there's actually a life cycle and a structure to commitment making and commitment keeping. It starts with a request by an initiator, and then there's a negotiation that takes place, and a declaration of intent to fulfill on the part of a responder. And then there's a performance phase, and then there's a declaration of delivery on the commitment, and a declaration of acceptance. It doesn't have to be a formal declaration, but these are elements of good commitment making and commitment keeping. And so commitments have structure and they have a life cycle. And the great theoretician, artificial intelligence guru, Fernando Flores, taught us a lot about this. And so it's very clear. People need to be very clear about commitments. I'd say one of the huge problems in companies today, many, if not most companies, is that people are sloppy about the way they make and keep commitments. And they don't have to be. It can be learned, it can be internalized, and it can be made very, very effective. And there's software available today that can help people keep commitments and make commitments. So there's really no excuse for not understanding it and doing it right. But that's one of the two core principles of self-management. We expect people to live up to the commitments they make. And so there's a lot of education and training and understanding that goes into how to do it well. And a lot of resources available on how to do it well. It's really the heart of effective self-management.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the rest of you guys. But we've been talking about in the last 2 weeks self-management on these sort of 3 levels: at an ecosystem level, at a team level, and at an individual level, like taking responsibility for the self in self-management. And I want to hear from you, Doug, about what your thoughts are on how we can balance the needs of the individual with the needs of the collective, because that seems like a really important sort of dance in self-managing companies. What are your insights about that?
Yeah, for me, my perspective is I think that lots of people, lots of companies and teams want to jump to practices and tools and systems. And I always start with principles. So for me, that's the starting point of everything. So if you start with the idea that human beings have free will, that's a principle. And if you don't believe that, then you're going to end up in a very different place than if you think people have free will and are going to act in their own self-interest. Self-management very much embraces the idea of free will, and it embraces the core principles of human interaction that I've already discussed. And that's our starting place. And it's very much about the individual. It's about respecting and honoring the voice of each and every individual in the ecosystem. It's about massive due process. It's about the abandonment of personal power and coercion and force. So if we start there, and we are all about protecting the voice of the individual, now we've got a safe space for every single individual. And people that want to go on power trips or throw their weight around or be the biggest voice in the room at every meeting, the culture shuts those people down very quickly, and in fact, ultimately excludes them because that's not okay. So we first of all protect the voice of each and every individual, and then we hold up a very high standard of expectation for commitment making, commitment keeping, which I've just described at some length, but also just good teamwork, good communication, good interaction, working together to accomplish things that no individual can accomplish by themselves. So when we protect the voice of the individual, and then we really elevate the teamwork expectations, and that seems to work very well.
Yeah, that's great. What questions, Kate, do you have any questions you want to ask Doug before I open up to the rest of the group?
Yeah. Hi, Doug. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Sorry, the internet kicked me off for a little bit. And I was wondering, if, just before you came on, we were looking at some of the, I call ecosystem codification that we do at Inspiral, which is to have out the commitments and the agreements of the ecosystem that we've agreed on via Lumio. And I was also voicing my aversion to too much codification of agreements, especially at the level of relationships between two people or three people. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, even if they're divergent to that point of view. And so what I'm saying is I think there can be a lot of agreements and social contracts, but they don't necessarily have to be written. And do you agree? Or if not, why not?
We ran at Morningstar. We ran for 6 years without any codification of anything other than basically the two core principles. So I would say that the agreements, the colleague letters of understanding, particularly, are so simple that they're basically one page. So here's why I'm here. Here's what I do. Here's basically the decisions that I make and how I measure what I do. That's it. It's like one page. So it's not an idea of complexity or onerous paperwork at all. I mean, people need to be able to communicate what their basic deal is, so that people in the two other factories and people throughout their enterprise know who to talk to when they need some resources, when they need some technical help. But also it's just clarity for the individual himself or herself. So I'm not talking about a big multi-page written contract. I'm pretty much talking about one sheet of paper.
Cool. Okay. That makes sense to me. So can you tell me about what you've done in the past where you feel an agreement has been crossed or someone hasn't kept to the agreement? What have you done?
Yeah, so what have I done? I will ask the person to live up to the commitment that he or she has already made. And it's not a conversation about why you're a bad person or how you're hurting the company. It's about your integrity. I mean, you promised your teammates that you would do X, Y, and Z. And by not doing X, Y, and Z, you have put our entire risk protection program at risk of being voided, and so that's not okay. So can I expect you to live up to the commitment you made with your integrity or not? Let me know. Because if you won't do it, somebody else has to do it. So that's an actual conversation I've had with somebody a long time ago.
Great. Brian, I think you had a question. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm really interested in when agreements struggle to form, or these protection, like what it looks like when these cultural protections escalate. I think, yeah, when teams are really high functioning, or individuals are in a good space and functioning well, these things don't happen. But I also think that it's important to understand them as a team, and this is something our team is struggling with right now: is how pre-agreement around escalation paths.
Okay. When you say escalation toward what?
So if agreement can't be formed through two individuals conversing, when consensus can't happen, I mean, one of the values we have in our team is being able to be sort of pragmatic and scrappy, and sometimes it's not appropriate to just wait till this can be resolved.
Yeah. So we have a couple of mechanisms. One is we have a process called gaining agreement. That's a resolution of differences process that can be invoked by anyone at any time. Basically, it's a request, and if the parties can't agree, they bring in a third party as a mediator, a fellow colleague, to mediate. They still can't agree, they bring in multiple mediators. If they still can't agree, then they document it and submit it to binding arbitration. So that's one way to resolve it. That mechanism is available to anyone at any time. The other mechanism is to just ask for help from a facilitator to help people work things out. So those options are always available.
Anyone else want to ask Doug questions about commitment making and keeping, or about Morningstar, or about self-management, or, here's your opportunity. So I encourage you to be brave and step in, ask a question.
I've got one. I mean, we're just about to have a Solutions Australia retreat. There's about 17 of us coming together, and I've caused it and organised it to happen. And we're in the process of working out. None of us know what we stand for. We've all kind of just been put into this solutions budget, into this budget together, and I'm kind of trying to work out what's the most important conversation to have, and I'm working out like what sort of exercises to do. It's a day and a half retreat basically. What do you see as the most important, and I want to introduce a lot of these principles to the team. Mm-hmm. What do you see as the most important conversation to have first when a new group of people come together and we've all got mixed ideas about what the mission of the company is and things like that?
Great. I think the most important conversation to have first is to decide what conversation to have first. And I'm not being facetious. There's actually a great exercise called the elegant set. And it was devised by a really smart guy named Rod Collins, who was an IT director here in the United States for Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is one of the biggest health insurance conglomerates here in the United States. And he had to figure out how to align 50 state organizations, or maybe it was 35, anyway, a lot of state organizations around a common IT project. And he used this exercise called the elegant set. And so he had, I think, a large number of people. They were seated around in groups of 10. And he had them, each one had a flip chart, and they just did brainstorming for some period of time. I don't know if it was 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever it was. They brainstormed what they thought the priorities should be for this project. And so he had however many tables, let's say it's 10 tables of 10 people each. And then he got the flip charts, he put them up on the wall side by side. And they went through like an art gallery, and they crossed out all the duplicates, because of course there were some duplicates. And they got down to a kind of a final list that everyone in the room agreed on. And so everyone's voice counted in this exercise. And then he gave them a box full of sticky dots. I don't know how many votes it was. Maybe it was 50. I don't know. But then they voted on which items were the highest priority and which should be tackled first. And if you wanted to put all 50 dots on one item because you thought it was of supreme importance, that's fine. Or you could do 10, 10, 10, 10, or you could spread them out across the entire list, whatever you wanted to do. But every individual had a voice. And so what happened was a very traditional Pareto distribution. And so it became very, very clear that the collective intelligence in the room was guiding them toward a subset of whatever the number was, 10 items. Those are the things they needed to focus on first. And Rod Collins said he could not have accomplished this project on time and on budget had he not gone through this exercise. It would have been absolutely impossible. So that's an idea. By the way, his book is called Wiki Management, and that's the book in which he describes the elegant set. One of my faves.
Any more questions?
I have a question, Doug. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. My question is to the point you said about creating this culture that shuts down behaviors that go sort of contrary to respecting and honoring the voice of the individual. I mean, how do you even start that? Like, I'm sort of in a team at the moment that I've come into, and I've already noticed some behavior that makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable, and I can see that it might be upsetting other individuals, but in a way I almost feel like I'm not brave enough to stand up and sort of step up to the mark and say, hey, that seemed a little aggressive, like, can we? So yeah, I guess I want to know from you, like, how did you start that process to really ensure that everyone was on the same page around protecting the voice of the individual? What's the best way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like the use of the word brave. It does take some gumption, some guts, some bravery to call that out. And what I just saw is not congruent with the principles of the company or the culture we're trying to create. You have to have someone, doesn't necessarily have to be you or anyone else in particular, but someone has to have enough gumption to call it out, because if you don't call it out, then you've chosen to tolerate it. And what you choose to tolerate starts to grow and spread and infect the culture. So, it takes that kind of idea of speaking up, that kind of zero power distance sensitivity, that willingness to have some grit and gumption and speak up. I mean, Peter Drucker said it best. He said, it's not enough to be a good listener in an organization. You've got to be able to articulate what's important, and culture is supremely important. So just have to find that space where you can call that out.
And do you recommend sometimes, like, would you say maybe don't bring it up in a group setting, perhaps take the person aside and do it offline? I mean,
yeah, unless it's really egregious, I would take it offline. First, I would take the person aside. Yeah, I mean, if it's gross behavior, I would probably have to call it out in the meeting. But for the most part, I'd try to take it offline.
Great, thank you.
Can I just jump in there and ask about power dynamics? So in this type of situation where someone doesn't feel brave, perhaps because they don't actually have the power that is sometimes necessary, or and sometimes privilege that comes alongside power to intervene or to put forward and to really stand up. Like, how does this affect, having gumption in groups, and like, what can we do to really bring forth those that don't necessarily have power? Because even in self-managing companies or teams, power dynamics still exist.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with maybe someone is particularly good at having these difficult conversations. So if I noticed something and I thought it needed to be addressed and I didn't feel like I was particularly good at articulating what was necessary, I might ask somebody else to articulate it on behalf of the team, for the good of the culture, for the good of the enterprise. We use a model, a tool called a tactical alliance grid, and we've used it successfully for years. And if we can state a problem, we identify the problem, we name the problem, we put it in the center of the grid, and then we identify people who can help us out solving the problem. So we literally and figuratively surround the problem with the names of people who can help. And then we identify, why would they want to help? Well, because they care about the culture, or because they want to make sure everyone has a voice, or whatever the reason happens to be, or they want to get work done and this is interfering. There may be a number of reasons and different levels of self-interest, but then we ask those people for help. And this tool works like magic, and we can often resolve problems very quickly with minimal energy expenditure, just by surrounding the problem and asking interested parties to help out. And if you want, I can send me an email and I'll send you the model for free. So
that sounds great. Thank you for bringing that in. I'll email you after this.
Great. Absolutely.
Cool. Going back to the floor, what other questions are bubbling up? We've still got Doug for a few more minutes.
I could ask a question around the agreements that you make, the colleague letter of understanding. Was that something that you introduced from sort of a central place, and then like it sort of permeated outwards? I mean, my question would be like, so within my own microcosm of where I work, my instinct is, okay, well, I can't impose that upon my team, but it would be so helpful for like to have more clarity, to have more transparency on what I do, what my team members do. So yeah, I guess I want to understand like the process of how that was implemented at Morningstar, and can it just start with the individual kind of being brave and sending it out to their team?
Yeah, depending on your team and your culture, yeah, one person can initiate it, absolutely. The way we came up with it was kind of a reaction to our rapid growth. So we built this second factory, and it was, we realized we needed some kind of coordination mechanism beyond what we had already, because it's great to have two core principles and everybody believes in them, but business is complex and you've got to be able to coordinate. And so basically our founder kind of drafted something. He gave it to me. I kind of went around, traveled around to the different factories and sat down and talked to people about it. It wasn't imposed. It's not something that I just went out and said, you got to have this done in the next 2 months. I didn't do that at all. It was a long, slow education process and showing people the benefits and just slowly getting people to understand the importance of it and how it's going to benefit them and tie into their own self-interest and their own effectiveness. It took a year, and I didn't do it by myself. I used that tactical alliance grid. It had a lot of help, but it wasn't imposed. It was just kind of slowly introduced over a period of months, and now it's a staple in the toolbox.
And can I ask, Doug, did you have, one thing that we've been talking about in our team is there seems to be a lot of fear around being transparent in case, because the organization is growing rapidly, there is kind of this undercurrent of worry that in being transparent about our processes and our goals from a personal level will mean that that's going to align to some type of performance metric and affect salary or all of those kinds of things. Did you find the same kind of fears running within your organization?
Yeah, it varies from individual to individual, and I still see that from time to time. And because these colleague letters of understanding are contracts between peers, occasionally we'll see peers that want to de-link from other particular colleagues because they don't really want to be accountable to that person. So we just have to work through that. And if people have a close working relationship with common goals and common processes, it's not really feasible to de-link and pretend like you don't have a working relationship with that person, because you do. Yeah, we see people shy away from these commitments. But again, that may fall into the category of a difficult conversation that you have to have with someone.
And just to clarify, these letters of understanding, they are not linked to performance metrics or bonuses or salary or.
Well, they are introduced into the discussion, which is an annual discussion about salary. And essentially, salary decisions are very localized to individual factories. And most people want nothing more than a cost of living increase, because they're compensated very well for the most part. And if someone wants some increase above and beyond the cost of living, then it's incumbent on them to make a business case, a bona fide business case for that increase. And so that may involve data or metrics linked to the colleague letter of understanding. So it very well could come in to that discussion.
Great, thank you.
So I think we have time for one last question. I have a question, and if no one else does, but if someone's desperate to ask, this is your chance. No? Okay, my final question was, Doug, what would you say if there are two people and one feels that a commitment has been broken and the other didn't see that as a commitment?
Mm-hmm.
What would you do then? What kind of conversation would you suggest to have?
If I am the initiator of the conversation and I feel that my fellow colleague has broken a commitment, then my request is, it could be anything related to that, but I may request that they fulfill the commitment, or that they renegotiate the commitment. If I think it's some gross or egregious breach of conduct, I may ask them to leave the company. I make a request. Colleagues have a responsibility to respond to requests in a professional manner. So there's a response to the request. And then if I still believe in my request and we can't achieve an agreement or a meeting of the minds on our own, then I will escalate to the second step, which is to bring in a third-party mediator, a fellow colleague. And their only role is to help us achieve a resolution of the request. So at the end of that process, we may have the same three options we had at the end of the first step, which is we agree, we disagree, or we negotiate some third option neither of us had thought of previously. If we still can't agree, and I still believe in my request, we'll bring in a panel of colleagues who will all serve as mediators, lending their collective intelligence to the process and help us identify a resolution. And if we're successful, we're done. If we negotiate some third option, we're done. If I still can't achieve a meeting of the minds and I still believe in my request, then we have agreed by virtue of working here that we will submit our difference in writing to an arbitrator for final binding arbitration, because it has to end somewhere. So that's what happens.
Yeah, I think the renegotiation thing, and again, I think so much of it comes down to this clarity thing, like getting to a meeting of minds, as you said, and if there's a difference in understanding of what a commitment is, then there's a lack of clarity there, or a lack of alignment.
Exactly right. Exactly
Yeah,
right.
definitely. Thank you. Okay, any last questions before we say thank you and goodbye to Doug? Yeah, Brian?
How are mediators and arbitrators how do I know who a mediator or arbitrator is? How does that come to be? Maybe I would like to become one. How does that work in the organization?
Well, the primary facilitators and mediators are well known. They're at each factory, at each location. Long-term colleagues, deeply steeped in the culture and understanding and mediation principles, etc. And the arbitrator's always been the president of the company or a designee of the president. He has he's like the guardian of the mission, right? So has a huge stake in the success of the company and self-management. And so the designee could be anyone. I mean, he could hand it off to anyone he wants. But and the arbitration situations might only occur once or twice a year. They're extremely rare. Most people work things out before that.
Cool, thanks, Brian. Daniel, did you want to ask something before we say goodbye to Doug? Oh, is Daniel frozen?
If there's time, I'd love to.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
If there's time, I'd love to. Yeah. Sorry, I think there's a delay. So, Doug, one thing we've noticed on our team that I'd love to hear how you handle at Morningstar is self-organization benefits certain people, most people, but there are certain people who see themselves as high achievers who thrive in more traditional organizations. And we wanted to convince them that this was the right place for them and they would get the support and sort of move up the metaphorical ladder when there is no metaphorical ladder. And so how did you create the growth and the retention and the excitement for those high achievers who might thrive in a normal system?
Right. Great question. Yeah, and you're right. There's no ladder. So if you come into this ecosystem, you're going to do what you're going to do unless you identify a distinct role and move toward another role. So we created what we called the Morningstar Pathway. So if an individual sees some desired future state that represents a role different than what he or she is engaged in currently, then it is incumbent on that individual to find a willing mentor who will craft, co-design a program to achieve the expertise needed to fulfill that desired future role. And it works because no one is going to agree to mentor someone unless there is reasonable foreseeability of success in the desired future role. So, for example, we had a journeyman mechanic who had ambition to be a full-charge industrial electrician, which is a very technical, very specific and demanding role and highly paid role. And so he demonstrated some aptitude. He went out and found a willing mentor, an industrial electrician. They crafted a 4-year program for this person to take college classes and on-the-job training and read books and do hands-on wiring and transformer work. And and they worked out a complete 4-year program with certifications at every step of the way. And at the end of the 4 years, he became a full charge industrial electrician, a significantly higher rate of pay. So if you have the ambition and the vision to see a different state and you want to move into that, you're completely free to go seek a willing mentor and be on your way if it makes sense for the enterprise.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for your generous sharing of insights and so much rich stuff there, and some great questions from the group as well. So thank you. Yeah, we'll contact you about getting the Tactical Alliance grid tool. That sounds super useful. So
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Lisa.
It was amazing.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Cool. That was pretty good. Lots of insights. Perhaps someone, Josh or Mary, what did you think? If you're willing,
Sure.
raise your hand. Mary?
I said I loved it, especially I can see applying a lot of what he was discussing, or his story to where we're at right now with organization at Consensus. Specifically, I'm working on the compensation design project, which is really challenging. He makes it seem so easy, but it's not. But it's great to have that, that insight from him. Amazing. Thank you very much for organizing that.
Yeah. It does sound easy, right? And then you're like, Edson and Malky, you're on the phone. Anyone want to share anything else that they thought was inspiring or interesting or total bullshit?
I mean, I'll dive in, which is, I found it incredible at the story of Morningstar, but it made me very nervous at times for Consensus. I think people around this room have expressed sort of concerns about how these ideas are received. And I think one thing Doug made clear is sort of growing from the start, getting the buy-in, and when people starting knowing that they're going on this journey and sort of getting that right from day one, I think is very important. I'd love to at some point in this course figure out how companies have transitioned into this successfully, because everything he says was awesome, and I keep thinking kind of what Mary says, is like, makes it sound so easy. How do we get there? What Tanya says, like, how do we bring this to the table when not everyone's receptive? So I think it's a somewhat different scenario that I don't necessarily feel so well equipped to deal with.
Yeah, I did. Oh, go ahead. Does someone else want to say? I was going to just say that really quickly, that he did start with, like, those top two agreements around the mission of the company, and I think we're still not quite there, so, but it was, that part brought tears to my eyes, literally. I almost thought I was going to start to cry about not needing armies and locks on our doors, navies. Yeah, so I think it really gets down to, like, the core company agreements first and foremost, and then he did mention as well how long it took to roll out some of, over a year to roll out, for example, the clue.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we're gonna I'm just gonna run through your teams for this week and your assignments really quickly, and then we're gonna do a checkout and close today's session. The teams are the teams and assignments I think are in Slack, but this week we have Team Kuru is Saraswati, Brian, Josh, and Thomas. And Team Mandala is Mary, Edson, Tanya, and Daniel. And Team Spirograph is Samantha, Travis, Malky, and Camilla. And the assignments this week you may have seen already, inspired by Morningstar and Doug. The individual assignment is to craft your own personal commercial mission statement. So there's a canvas there that you can use as a sort of template, or you can create your own thing. It's up to you. There's some guiding questions there to sort of help you craft that, and then share that with your teammates, and try and find an element that requires negotiation and kind of play around with what those kind of conversations are like. And then your group assignment is to create a social contract in your team. So not something kind of cliche and empty, but something, you know, meaningful for you guys. And then you'll share that back with us all in the Friday session.
How's my connection? I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, it seems to be okay.
Good. Yeah, I think
I'm kidding.
I'm going to put a video in the Slack from a group, a team that was on our last public training, just to show what you can do to make this fun in a remote way, because it's very easy to make a one-page written thing, and it's that your imagination go wild. And crucially there, it's so important that these things are actually living agreements that are not just like you write them and then you forget about them. So thinking about how to make them a bit more lively is a good way to make them alive. I'll hand back to you, Lisa, for a quick checkout.
Okay, so quick checkout. The checkout question for today is, what is your all-time favorite meal? And we'll nominate again. So Thomas, let's start with you. What's your all-time favorite meal? And then nominate someone else.
I really do like spaghetti bolognese. Yeah.
Great. And
do you want me to choose somebody?
Yeah, who are you going to nominate?
Okay, I choose Travis.
Funny, I love pesto on just about anything, including pasta and salmon. So how about Brian?
Something with scallops or calamari to start, and then I'm really enjoying like a good tikka masala.
And nominate someone, Brian?
Thank you for the reminder, and I will nominate Kate this time.
On the spot. I'm into this amazing North Indian curry called eggplant bagan, which is like smoky eggplant that's been cooked for a long.
Oh, you cut out. Did you nominate someone, Kate?
Oh yeah, sorry, Mary.
I don't know. I love all food. I think it's terrible. Okay, pizza. Pizza.
And who are you nominating, Mary?
Sorry, Josh.
I'm going to have to say palak paneer. And Tanya.
My dish is something that is made very famously by my mother, and it's called camarão aguilo, and it's basically tiger prawns cooked in, like, fired up in brandy with loads of chili, loads of garlic. It's delicious. I am going to nominate Travis.
I already went, but I'm still stirring over. I thought you said tiger paws at first. Tiger paws? What? Where do you live? How about next then? Let's do, since I went there, I want to try that.
How did you already go? How did I completely miss that? I'm so sorry, Travis.
Oh my gosh, no.
I'm going to nominate someone then. Let's go with Edson. Did you go? No.
My all-time favorite meal, I think, is rabbit. In Mexico, we cook rabbit I don't know what is the English exactly, but cooked by my grandmother. And I nominate Samantha.
I really like cinnamon buns, and I will nominate Josh.
I already went, so Melky, go.
Yeah, I think I'm the last one left. I will have to go with fish tacos all day, every day.
Nice. Did you go, Daniel? Did I miss that?
Nope, not yet. And I was appreciative of the time because I've just gone vegetarian and everything I'm thinking has meat in it. But I guess my mother's mac and cheese, pasta al forno. My mom's Italian, so the Italian style mac and cheese probably be it. Then.
Yum. Mine is a dish called Xiaolong Bao, and this particular restaurant in Singapore that's just like, oh, I could eat it every day. It's so good. Soup dumplings, really yummy. Okay, guys, thank you for your participation this week and for all your thoughtful questions and sharings. It's been awesome, and have a great week, and catch you on Friday.
Woohoo! Looking forward to Friday.
See you.
I'm going to be somewhere stable.